Hello, this is Volume 2, Chapter 7, or Chapter 30, if you do not have a book that is divided into volumes. All right, here we go. Sir William stayed only a week at Hunsford, but his visit was long enough to convince him of his daughter's being most comfortably settled, and of her possessing such a husband and such a neighbor as were not often met with. While Sir William was with them, Mr. Collins devoted his mornings to driving him out in his gig and showing him the country. But when he went away, the whole family returned to their usual employments, and Elizabeth was thankful to find that they did not see more of her cousin by the alteration, for the chief of the times between breakfast and dinner was now passed by him either at work in the garden or in reading and writing and looking out of the window in his own book room, which fronted the road. So when Charlotte's dad left, he only stayed there a week. Elizabeth and I think the sister are staying there a little bit longer. I mean, when I say the sister, I mean Charlotte's sister. They're staying there a little bit longer. And so now that Charlotte's dad is gone, Mr. Collins is back to normal, or he's doing what he would usually do when he didn't have company. So he's spending time in his garden, he's reading and writing. So I guess he really doesn't interact with Charlotte that much. Maybe not, or maybe he's just leaving them, she and Elizabeth, to their own business. I don't know. Let's see. So the room in which the ladies sat was backwards. Elizabeth at first had rather wondered that Charlotte should not prefer the dining parlor for common use. It was a better sized room and had a pleasanter aspect, but she soon saw that her friend had an excellent reason for what she did, for Mr. Collins would undoubtedly have been much less in his own apartment had they sat in one equally lively, and she gave Charlotte credit for the arrangement. So Elizabeth noticed that Charlotte took a room that was not as nice as the others, and she's like, well, why would she do that? There's another room that she can have as her own. And what she means is this is where Charlotte spends most of her time. I don't know, she sews or draws or does whatever women do that are accomplished, and so, but she said, oh, I know why she picked it, because Mr. Collins would prefer to be in a different room that's a lot nicer. And so she said, well, maybe she did it on purpose. From the drawing room they could distinguish nothing in the lane, and were indebted to Mr. Collins for the knowledge of what carriages went along, and how often, especially Miss de Bourgh, drove by in her phaeton, which he never failed coming to inform them of, though it happened almost every day. She not unfrequently stopped at the parsonage, and had a few minutes' conversation with Charlotte, but was scarcely ever prevailed on to get out. Very few days passed in which Mr. Collins did not walk to Rosings, and not many in which his wife did not think it necessary to go likewise. And till Elizabeth recollected that there might be other family livings to be disposed of, she could not understand the sacrifice of so many hours. So she didn't understand why Mr. Collins and Charlotte spent so much of their time going and coming to Rosings, or spending time at Rosings. Anyway, now and then they were honored with a call from her ladyship. So every now and then Lady Catherine would go to the Collinses' residence. And it says, and nothing escaped her observation that was passing in the room during these visits. She examined into their employments, looked at their work, and advised them to do it differently, found fault with the arrangement of the furniture, or detected the housemaid negligence, and if she accepted any refreshment, seemed to do it only for the sake of finding out that Mrs. Collins's joints of meat were too large for her family. So, I mean, that's rude. I mean, she's going to somebody's house and telling them about all their mistakes, that they're making and how to do things better. And I mean, I think that's kind of rude. I mean, I wouldn't go to somebody's house and be like, oh, the way you put your furniture is really, you really should change it, or the way you made this flower arrangement, that's nice. You should do it differently, or add these flowers. I mean, I don't do that. I don't think you guys do that. Elizabeth soon perceived that though this great lady was not in the commission of the peace for the county, she was a most active magistrate in her own parish, the minutest concerns of which were carried to her by Mr. Collins, and whenever any of the cottagers were disposed to be quarrelsome, discontented, or too poor, she sallied forth into the village to settle their differences, silence their complaints, and scold them into harmony and plenty. So she wasn't everybody else's business, and Mr. Collins was the one who told her, like, hey, guess who's arguing? Oh, guess who's this and doing this and that, or guess who can't afford to do this. And so she would go and like make it her business to help people out, right? The entertainment of dining at Rosings was repeated about twice a week, and allowing for the loss of Sir William and there being only one card table in the evening, every such entertainment was a counterpart of the first. Their other engagements were few, as the style of living of the neighborhood in general was beyond the Collinses' reach. This, however, was no evil to Elizabeth, and upon the whole she spent her time comfortably enough. There were half hours of pleasant conversation with Charlotte, and the weather was so fine for the time of year that she had often great enjoyment of out of doors. Her favorite walk, and where she frequently went while the others were calling on Lady Catherine, was along the open grove which edged that side of the park, where there was a nice sheltered path which no one seemed to value but herself, and where she felt beyond the reach of Lady Catherine's curiosity. Okay, so Elizabeth found herself with a lot of time, which she liked. She liked being by herself now and again, and when she was by herself, she'd go and walk in the garden, and we're not talking about like a little garden in your backyard. We're talking like big gardens with walkways and stuff. And so she found this one pathway that she thinks that nobody else really frequents or walks by, and she uses that one because she likes it. She just found comfort in that one. In this quiet way, the first fortnight of her visit soon passed away. Easter was approaching, and the week preceding it was to bring an addition to the family at Rosings, which in so small a circle must be important. Elizabeth had heard soon after her arrival that Mr. Darcy was expected there in the course of a few weeks, and though there were not many of her acquaintance whom she did not prefer, his coming would furnish one comparatively new look at in their Rosings party, and she might be amused in seeing how hopeless Miss Bingley's designs on him were by his behaviour to his cousin, for whom he was evidently destined by Lady Catherine, who talked of his coming with the greatest satisfaction, spoke of him in terms of the highest admiration, and seemed almost angry to find that he had already been frequently seen by Miss Lucas and herself. So now Easter's coming. Mr. Darcy's coming to visit his aunt. That's Lady Catherine. That's his aunt. And Elizabeth's like, oh, well, at least she'll find amusement in seeing his behavior with Miss Darcy. I'm sorry, not Miss Darcy. She wants to see his behavior with Miss de Bourgh, because apparently he is engaged to her, betrothed to her. So she thinks that's funny because Caroline Bingley really, really, really wants to be with Darcy. And so she's like, let me see how this is going to work out. How funny. All right, so his arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking the whole morning within view of the lodge's opening to Hunsford Lane in order to have the earliest assurance of it, and after making his bow as the carriage turned into the park, he hurried home with the greatest intelligence. On the following morning, he hastened to Rosings to pay his respects. Okay, so Darcy's there. Mr. Collins, was waiting by the lane or by the gate just to see when he arrived, and he did. And so he went the next morning, to go visit Mr. Darcy. There were two nephews of Lady Catherine to require them, for Mr. Darcy had brought with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the younger son of his uncle, Lord so-and-so. And to the great surprise of all the party, when Mr. Collins returned, the gentleman accompanied him. So he went in the morning to go say hello to Mr. Darcy, and he was like, oh, you brought your cousin with you, Colonel Fitzwilliam, great. And so when Mr. Collins returned to his own house, Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam were with him. Wonder why Darcy wanted to go. Charlotte had seen them from her husband's room crossing the road, and immediately running into the other, told the girls what an honor they might expect, adding, I may thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. Mr. Darcy would never have come so soon to wait upon me. Elizabeth had scarcely time to disclaim all right to the compliment before their approach was announced by the doorbell, and shortly afterwards the three gentlemen entered the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam, who led the way, was about 30, not handsome, but in person and address most truly of the gentleman. Mr. Darcy looked just as he had been used to look in Hertfordshire, paid his compliments, with his usual reserve, to Mrs. Collins, And whatever might be his feelings toward her friend, met her with every appearance of composure. Elizabeth merely curtsied to him without saying a word. Colonel Fitzwilliam entered into conversation directly, with the readiness of ease of a well-bred man, and talked very pleasantly, but his cousin, after having addressed a slight observation on the house and garden to Mrs. Collins, sat for some time without speaking to anybody. Again, Mr. Darcy does that. Maybe it's not that he's proud, maybe he just doesn't like to talk. I mean, is that bad? Right? He's just a silent, mysterious type. At length, however, his civility was so far awakened as to inquire of Elizabeth after the health of her family. Really? He wants to know about Elizabeth's family? I thought he didn't like them, or they were embarrassing. I mean, he talked crap about them a long time ago, or when he was at Netherfield, remember? She answered him in the usual way, and after a moment's pause added, "My eldest sister has been in town these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there?" Elizabeth is kind of like throwing it at him, like, "Hey, my sister Jane's in London." "I know you know," is what she's kind of saying. She was perfectly sensible that he never had, but she wished to see whether he would betray any consciousness of what had passed between the Bingleys and Jane. And she thought he looked a little confused as he answered that he had never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet. The subject was pursued no further, and the gentleman soon afterwards went away. So I don't think he knew that Jane was in London. Maybe Miss Bingley isn't telling anybody that she's there.